that the extreme right has found the perfect issue. I think, they struck out with abortion, they struck out with gay marriage, and now it's about supposedly parental rights, and it's all about who.
It'd be interesting to see which way people go.
Yeah, I think, there's definitely people who don't understand things, but I haven't seen too many people that I think are disrespectful in any way, and if they do, I'll cut them off.
Well, is the primary audience from here, and are we?
Yeah, most of the people I see here are, but we've advertised all over the state. So we'll see how many people who are not members of this community show up. When I was on, Ricky and I were on Mindy Todd's show, The Point, this week.
I got the link, but I haven't listened yet.
Yeah. She put some stuff on their website about it, so we'll see. If you build it, they will come. Is that right here?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought so.
Oh yeah, I do.
I do, even if I don't agree with everything that everyone does, I just love them.
Yep.
Look at them showing up.
Totally. Yep.
It makes my heart sing, it really does.
Well, it was interesting to me. I noticed there was 2 police in the parking lot across the street, but nobody was in the house. So, are you watching the back?
Yeah. Well,
I have to tell you that night when we were talking, it changed things for me. Because
yes. I think once this starts, he will be on the premises, kind of checking things out.
Never used to worry about it.
No, I know, but you may or may not remember, but I think it's been probably 10 years that someone came in and shot a bunch of people at a UU church service.
I didn't know.
Yeah, in Tennessee.
Oh.
Do you remember that when they shot up the
Yes.
UU church service in Tennessee? This has been maybe 15 years ago.
I thought you were talking locally.
Yeah. It was really, I couldn't believe it. Augie. Oh my gosh. Poor Augie's gonna
Augie. Yeah, Augie was great today.
He's such a little adult, isn't he?
About change.
Susan. I thought you might.
So feel free to throw a shout out and just say before you leave, make a visit.
I'm gonna, don't worry. Mike is live now. Okay, first take this off. Oh. Give them a few more minutes because I see people coming in. Is that okay? A minute or two. And here comes Kaiza. My music mask is so much better than this one. I can't see it all with it. Okay, he's good. Welcome, everyone. Do I have your attention now? Welcome to the Meeting House Speaker Series. I'm going to read this because I don't remember all of it. Voices of Cape Cod. Yes, Ricky will tell me if I'm too close or too far. Anyway, we appreciate your support of the speaker series, and we're happy to offer this event free of charge. We're currently funding this monthly speaker series from grants from the cultural councils of Brewster, Dennis, Orleans, the Cape Cod Five, the First Parish Brewster Endowment Fund, the FPB Welcoming Congregation Committee, and our Social Justice Committees, as well as your generous donations. More about that later. The ushers will pass the hat toward the end of this event. I just want to remind you, I think everyone's noticed, but this event was advertised as masked, so except when the speakers are speaking, I ask you all to remain masked for our safety. Thank you. If you can amplify future offerings of this series, please pick up a flyer. We have Hartman Dietz coming next week, and share it in your community. We want to widen our circle of welcome. A bit of the background of the speaker series. Over 2 years ago now, at our annual meeting, this congregation passed what is called the Eighth Principle, which reads, we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. A consortium of the Board of Trustees, the Social Justice Committee, and the Reparations Task Force has formed to create the Meeting House Speaker Series, Voices of Cape Cod
Since January, we've been presenting speakers here each month at the Meeting House. We will be centering voices of Black and Indigenous people, of marginalized people, of trans people in our midst. We have not heard enough of these voices. We certainly haven't, but we are. We must work harder to dismantle racism and oppression in ourselves and in others. I'm going to read something that the Reparations Task Force recently had passed by the board. We worked on it this last year. Pardon? Oh, okay. I'm not familiar with you know me. Not familiar with mics. First Parish Brewster Unitarian Universalist occupies land that was home to the Wampanoag people for thousands of years before European colonists violated their sovereignty and assaulted their people, livelihood, and culture. Acknowledging this history, we honor the resilience and strength of today's Wampanoag tribe. That is our land acknowledgement, and we hope to be able to read it at every event, because we do appreciate being on this land. Okay, next I'm going to introduce Maureen, or Dr. Maureen Osborne. Dr. Osborne is a clinical psychologist with over 30 years of experience as a therapist in private practice, working with transgender people and their families as they navigate the legal, emotional, and ethical challenges of gender dysphoria. She is a longtime member of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health and is certified by the Global Education Institute. She was honored with the fellowship status in the Philadelphia Society of Clinical Psychologists for her work in community education about transgender issues, and has given talks and workshops at many national and international gender conferences. She appeared in the award-winning film Trans, as well as the documentary Just Gender. Dr. Osborne retired from her Philadelphia area practice and moved to Cape Cod in 2015, and we're so grateful. Currently, she has a small online therapy practice and has been leading a Zoom support group for cisgendered partners of transgender persons for almost a decade. She uses she, her pronouns and identifies as a straight cisgendered ally of trans community. Here on Cape Cod, she has continued her education and advocacy efforts in our local community and is a member of the LGBTQ welcoming congregation here at First Parish Brewster UU Church. Dr. Osborne.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Sue, and the Meeting House Speakers Series Committee, and to the LGBT welcoming congregation here. It's so wonderful to be able to speak about this issue that's so dear to my heart, and to put together this panel of just terrific people who you'll get to meet. So, and I also want to thank all of you for taking time out on your Sunday afternoon to come and listen. So first, I want a show of hands. How many of you identify as being trans yourself? Okay. Not counting these guys. Okay. How many of you have an acquaintance who's trans? Yeah, now we're getting somewhere. A relative? A friend? A coworker? How comfortable do you feel interacting with your trans friends and acquaintances? You don't have to answer. Today, our goal is to increase your understanding and your comfort level and your empathy for trans folks, as well as to provide a counterpoint to the misinformation that's been put out by political groups with an agenda. So I'll tell you a little bit about my background because I think it's important that you know where I'm coming from. As was mentioned, I am not trans, I'm cisgender, meaning that my brain's gender and my body's gender, very fortunately for me, line up. I was in practice as a psychologist, trained just as a garden variety
clinical psychologist, in which there were no classes about transgender whatsoever. But I was always interested in both human sexuality and gender issues. And in 1992, a birth-assigned man about 50-something years old, had 2 adult children, was married, walked into my office without an appointment and said, I just watched a Phil Donahue show. Anyone remember Phil Donahue? And there was a transsexual, that's what they used to call it, person. And this person said, I think that's who I am. And I said, oh, okay, well, let's see where that leads. And started working with that person and came to understand right away that it wasn't just the path of this person, but the spouse and the children and all the different contexts in which they lived that needed attention and needed understanding and needed empathy. I'm a contextual family therapist by training, which means when I'm talking to someone individually, I'm always keeping in mind who are their important committed relationships and how they think about all of this. And so within a year, I had many trans clients, amazingly, and I had a group within another year, and I started speaking at conferences, and what do you know, here I am. I went to lots and lots of transgender conferences and had a lot of fun, gave a lot of talks, and I came to realize that these were my community. These were people that I really loved and admired. So today when we refer to trans people, we're just talking about anyone whose inner sense of gender differs from the one that they were assigned at birth. So there are many ways in which people in the transgender community identify within this broad definition. And there are also objections, even among trans folks, as to the umbrella term. But that's a complication we won't talk about today. The main point is that lived human experience and scientific research supports the idea that this forced choice of male and female doesn't fully describe the range of gender identity. So, as I mentioned to you before, the term cisgender, which you probably hear, many of you know, many of you don't know, just refers to people who are not transgender. And it comes out of science, out of chemistry, which means sort of the same as. And transgender people is on the other side of. So cisgender people return, I'm going to run through Trans 101 really quickly. So I've got hours to speak, but I've got other people who can do it so much better than I am. So cisgender people refer to themselves with the pronouns he and him or she and her. Trans people use either the binary pronouns of the gender identity that they identify with, or in the case of non-binary trans people, they might use the pronouns they or them. And there's a lot of other creative pronouns that have been produced, but we'll stick with those for now. So just to let you know that using they and them as a singular has a long and respected history in the English language. It's not wrong to use they or them to describe a singular person who identifies as binary. So, if you are unsure about what pronouns that a person that you're having a conversation uses, say, what are your pronouns? Mine are she and her. Don't say what are your preferred pronouns, because that sounds like they are just playing a game and they prefer it. So right now, the estimate currently of how many trans people are in this country is about 1.6 million. And at the current time, a significantly higher incidence among younger people in the 13 to 17 age category. I'm not going to go into today all the reasons for that, but it's not, for the most part, a fad, okay? And that estimate could be low because a lot of people are not comfortable with revealing themselves, and they have faced discrimination in the past, and they are facing even more discrimination now. So they may, unless they feel really safe, not say how they identify. So I'm going to go through really quickly just to make sure that you kind of get the differences, that there's some confusion about this. So there's sexual orientation, there's romantic attraction, there's gender identity, sex assigned at birth, and gender expression. So, just really quickly, this is like a little bit of a humorous way to think about it. So, gender identity is between your ears. It's not up here, it's down here. Gender or sexual orientation is between your legs. Romantic attraction is in your heart. Sex assigned at birth is the best guess of your birthing team. And gender expression is how you show your gender identity. So, what was once diagnosed as gender identity disorder is now officially called gender dysphoria. So it's not a disorder or mental illness. And many trans people have problems with the whole idea of diagnosis, but that again is another topic. So I wanted to just share with you some of the psychological and emotional consequences of this gender incongruity, just based on all of my years of clinical practice. This is not research, this is what I've experienced. So if you have this gender incongruity, you realize that gender expectations about how you're supposed to act permeate every element of our lives. So there's little escape from feeling that you don't belong, or something's gone wrong, or you're crazy or doomed. You might learn to live a divided life or a partial life while carrying a heavy secret. You might live in fear of being discovered, which can affect your ability to learn and to concentrate, and it can lead to severe anxiety. You may be unable, you are often unable, to develop healthy sexual and romantic relationships because you're not sure who you are as a gendered person. You might face difficult choices, risk losing everything and everybody by moving toward a more comfortable gender, or live with a lie that gets harder and harder to suffer as you get older. And I will say that when I first started out, most of the people that I saw were in their mid-40s, that was probably the average age, and had already been married and had children, which is a lot more complication. And you might feel so trapped by your circumstances that you consider or attempt suicide. Suicidal thinking and attempts are much higher in the trans community than in non-trans people, and particularly with younger people. Gender transition, it's a term referring to a person deciding that they need to move toward expressing or embodying their gender identity, the one that feels most natural and most comfortable to them. It could be social, meaning how you present yourself socially. It could be hormonal. You could take hormones to change what's going on in your body. It could be surgical, or it could be all of the above. The percent of people who have surgical alteration is still only about 35%, but it sounds as if we're, if you listen to extreme positions, that we're cutting off genitals right and left of little children, and it simply does not happen. Gender-affirming care, I'm sure you've heard that said enough, refers to the care that's provided by medical and mental health specialists in helping people come to terms with their gender identity in ways that most benefit their overall health, their psychological well-being, and their self-fulfillment. It has been determined to be medically necessary for decades by all the major healthcare organizations like the AMA and the APA, American Academy of Pediatrics, and has been covered by health insurance providers for at least a decade. Research shows that it's been linked, this transition, to dramatic increases in psychological well-being and decreases in suicidality, substance abuse, and the use of dangerous self-medication treatments in both adults and adolescents. Regrets and detransition are rare and usually attributable to going into society and facing a lot of obstacles that weren't well anticipated. And I know it sounds like a self-advertisement, but therapy is so helpful to point out what you might be facing along the way. So surgical procedures have gotten much better. More providers are trained in these surgeries, and medical insurance has been paying for them based on medical necessity. Still, as I said before, only 35% have had at least one surgical medical procedure. And I want to point out that not all trans people are body dysmorphic, meaning that they don't necessarily hate their bodies. And social and legal transition are other options for them. So, despite all that I've told you, the scientific consensus, legislatures in mostly conservative states have introduced at least 400 anti-trans bills in the past year, as if that were our most pressing priority. Mostly aimed at children and youth and their parents and their health care providers. These threaten the lives of children and youth and criminalize parents who want to make health care decisions for their children, for and with them. It also jeopardizes those of us who treat these populations. These laws are not to protect children. They are not harmed by medical care. If a mistake happens, it can almost always be reversed. And there's no evidence that people who are making up these laws care about the main thing that's threatening children, which is the easy availability of guns. In Missouri last week, the Attorney General tried to enforce harsh gender treatment restrictions onto adult populations. Anti-trans rhetoric was a central theme at the conservative CPAC conference, where one of the speakers said that we needed to eradicate transgenderism. And a very recent New York Times article, like last week, reported that this onslaught of conservative legislative backlash was a deliberate strategy, politically motivated, to provide a wedge issue that voters could agree with. So abortion kind of failed, gay marriage kind of failed as a wedge issue, so this is the latest. This is nothing more than persecution against a minority community with no scientific evidence to support it, really. And most of the objections that you hear are anecdotal accounts or just pure prejudice or lies. There are a lot of lies out there. And sadly, it seems to be working. So in a recent article in the New York Times, I made the terrible mistake of reading the comments. And I would say that the New York Times is a pretty liberal newspaper, right? I'd say probably 60% were in favor of the bans, which just broke my heart. And they often provided these opinions and anecdotes. So these attacks on this vulnerable community are based on fear, misunderstanding, and discomfort in the cisgender community, and the willingness of a political minority to seize upon these issues as a political weapon, based on exaggeration of harm, dangerous stereotyping, and downright misinformation. It's not the time today, but it's really important that you know that there's very little surgery or hormones with children. Most of the time when I see a child, I don't see a child, I see their parents, and I try to support them and educate them. There's some treatment using hormones, puberty blocking hormones, that delay puberty. They've been around for a long time. They've used them to treat precocious puberty in non-trans kids. And they're used in order to sort of give a child time to sort of consolidate their identity. And once they've done that, then they might become eligible for cross-gendered hormones. But surgery, it's very rare. I don't write letters for people under 18 anymore for surgery because it's just too, well, it's pretty risky for me, but it's, most surgeons don't want to do it. Unlike, many of the comments that seem to imply that surgeons are making tons of money and this is like a big, scam. It's not a scam. So what can we do to push back on all of these initiatives? First of all, thank you. You're here today. We educate ourselves on the scientific consensus about medically necessary transgender care. Where legislatures are moving to ban books talking about different gender identities, we need to make our voices heard in opposition. We need to arm ourselves with scientifically grounded information that supports the reality of gender diversity. Listen to the stories of transgender people, which you will today. Learn about their lives and the obstacles that they've faced in just trying to live authentically. Ask your trans friends and acquaintances how you can become a better ally. Be intentional about respecting trans people and their pronouns. We were all brought up assuming that the gender binary is set in stone, so it will take some time and effort to loosen those knee-jerk assumptions and prejudices. It's hard for everybody, but it's doable. Understand that trans rights are human rights. An attack on gender-affirming care is an attack on diversity and all the ideals that we hold dear. Use your voice and your political power to fight the backward slide of legislation favoring scientific ignorance and outdated prejudices about gender, sexual, and racial stereotyping. Go to a school board meeting. Make your thoughts and feelings known. Come armed with the facts. So, I will be happy at the end of this talk to answer questions from all of you about any points that I've made. And I'm also going to open up that question and answer session to any member of the panel. I only ask that you give each member of the panel now the courtesy of deep listening without judgment or critique. And you'll have an opportunity to participate with respectful comments and questions after they've finished speaking. One other thing I wanted to make note of is that we have the president of Cape Cod Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays here. Joe Lima, you want to raise your hand? There he is. And he has a table outside with lots of wonderful information and pamphlets about transgender people, families, children, and we'll make that available to you. He also asked me to read something, which I'm looking for. I'm sorry. He'll explain it to you. In any case, I have found it really important to not be the cisgender expert person in doing this work. And so I always appear with people who are trans and make sure that you hear their voice, their struggles, which I have never lived, although I spent a long time hearing the stories and walking along. It's been my incredible privilege to do that. I knew when I started working with trans people that it wasn't just a specialty, it was a calling. And it's been the greatest privilege of my life. So I am going to introduce you to our panel today. I want to let you know that one of our panel members was not going to be able to come because of a health flare-up. Alejandro Marcel, wonderful speaker, has done a lot of work with elder care in the trans community, promoting good elder care. And I know he must be unhappy to not be here. Oh, we're also streaming live. Everybody want to wave to the live audience? Thank you for listening. Okay, I'm going to introduce you to the members of our panel, and each person is going to speak. I gave each person a list of focus questions, but I told them, this will be some things that you might want to think about, but say what you want to say. If a person has spoken and I think that it might help to expand on something, or I'd like to know a little more, I might say something, but we won't have the audience participate until the end. Hope that's okay. Okay, so our first panelist is going to be our very own Ricky Bates. I'm going to read you a little bio. She wrote me a nice little bio. Ricky Bates is a staff member at First Parish Brewster and a locally well-known drummer on Cape Cod. Well-known drummer. She's an incredible drummer. I've played with her. A lot of us have. She was the recipient of the Gala Ball Skip Warren Award for Leadership in the LGBTQ community, having successfully fought for insurance coverage for transgender health care in Massachusetts in a series of landmark legal appeals against the state's Medicaid provider. She rocks.
Ready? Here, it's working. Okay, good. Oh boy. So I guess I'm going to talk about I'm not guessing, I am going to talk about myself, and I'm going to start at, the beginning for me. And, when I first started to figure out that I was different from the other kids. And this goes back for me to when I was 4 years old. It was before I entered kindergarten. My mom was a kindergarten teacher herself, and she started teaching the year before I entered. And, it was half days back then, that she was only gone for the half day. But when she was gone, I would be taken care of by a very nice woman who lived a block away. And so across the street from where this woman lived, there was a big sand lot. And that's where all the boys played. And I saw them over there, and it looked like they were having fun, and I wanted to participate. So one day I just wandered over there and, introduced myself and, started playing around, and they, they thought I was funny. They laughed at me, and they were there, and their mode of play was pretty rough and tumble, and they were, and it just didn't fit well for me. And anyway, and they ridiculed me a lot. And one of the things that I distinctly remember is that they thought I acted like a girl, which I wasn't really sure what that meant, really. But they, they made fun of me, and they like to punch me around a lot, and anyways, the punching thing got to get a little bit out of hand for me, and it was, I felt really bad for not being accepted. And so, I talked to my parents about it, and my dad was like, if somebody just punches you, just hit him back. And so that turned out to be not great advice. So I the next day I went to the sand lot, and the kid punched me in the arm really hard, and I started crying. And then I went and punched him in the stomach, and that was like, a feather hitting him, because I wasn't very strong. And then he just punched me really, really hard in the stomach, and I went down. I fell on my back, and I couldn't breathe. And I couldn't breathe for a long time, and it was really scary. And just a big crowd of kids gathered around, and and they started laughing at me. And I remember one kid just going, "Look, his lips are turning blue. Isn't that great?" And that was a very traumatic experience for me, and affected me very deeply. Still affects me to this day. I still have some trauma issues around that, and I can be triggered by certain things. And so, that brings me right back to that. And I lose my breath when that happens, surprisingly. Not surprisingly. Anyways, so, I talked to my parents about that again, and I was miserable. It was terrible. Actually, my mom had to leave school early that day that happened, to come pick me up, because I was just a mess. And so, later that evening, my mom suggested, well, why don't you just go play with the girls? The girls don't play where the boys play. There's another place down the road where I think the girls play. Why don't you just go down there and play with them? And I did, and it just felt really great. They were really nice, and there was like no trouble. They were accepting, and I had fun, and it just felt like I belonged there. And so that lasted for a few days, and then the boys found out that I was playing with the girls, and that really, then they doubled down on me. And so this was getting close to when I was going to start going to kindergarten, and back in those days, I used to walk to school. It was pretty close by, and I had to walk right by the houses where the bullies lived to get to school, and they'd sit around and wait for me, because they just couldn't wait to lay into me, and so and they, and I get beat up a lot. And that continued all through elementary school. I was just made fun of a lot. I was terrible at sports. Actually back in those days, they didn't have, the sports were co-ed. The boys and the girls played sports together, and and I was like the worst of everybody, you know. Even all the girls I think could whip me on at any sport thing, you know. I just couldn't do anything sports wise. And anyways, it was socially terribly difficult for me. And anyways, so then along comes junior high school and, you know, puberty. And that's when I really started to realize that I was way different. I mean, I already knew that I was different because of the stuff that was going on in elementary school, but, you know, once, you know, the hormones start kicking in, you know, I mean, it's crazy for all kids in adolescence, but for me, the changes that were starting to happen to me in my body just really felt wrong. And I really didn't like what was happening. I didn't like the change in my voice. I hated that. It ruined my singing voice. I could sing pretty good before before I got the male thing. And the Adam's apple, it just looked. I didn't like it. And then the other stuff that happens. And also right around that time is when I started to actually physically feel like my body should be more like the girls. And it was like a physical sensation thing. It wasn't like like I never wanted to be a girl. That's not what it was. It was, I mean, actually, in a way, what I wanted to be was like the boys, but I couldn't be like the boys, and I sort of hated myself for that. And you know, at the same time, I had this sort of other thing that was going on, which is that I felt like I wanted to try women's clothes on, you know, girls' clothes on, and you know, I would experiment with my mom's clothes when she wasn't away, and it felt good. It just felt good. But it was also creepy to me that I was feeling that way, and I just felt really messed up. There was nobody that I knew. I mean, the word transgender didn't exist, and other people that had, you know, those kinds of feelings were completely hidden from view. You know, this is in the 1960s now, and so I didn't know anybody else that was like me, and I certainly wasn't something that I was getting from, you know, something that I picked up as a fad because the other kids were doing it. So anyway, yeah, and that's when I really started. I mean, the word wasn't invented yet, but that's when I really knew that I was what I was, which was something that was different, in between male and female, or maybe yearning to be female, sort of, in a way. Anyway, I'm running out of time. So you know, later, you know, I had to keep. I couldn't let anybody know what was going on with me. I had to keep it a secret. I couldn't let anyone know. I was deathly afraid that it would ruin my life. And the other thing that happened that was when all this stuff was going on in junior high is that I also felt really sexually attracted to girls, which just didn't make any sense to me. I just thought I was crazy. So, you know, life went on, and I kept my secret. Nobody knew. I got married. You know, in my early 20s, I got married. We were married for 6 years. And then I finally I couldn't hold it in any longer, and I got into therapy, and someone helped me come out, and then my world exploded. Everything just blew apart, and my wife asked for divorce. The band that I was in, which was pretty popular around here on Cape, they fired me, and pretty much all of my friends just backed away from me. You know, it's like I was a worm or a spider or something, and they just, you know, it was weird. And it was a terrible time in my life. I had 10 very dark years where I had very few friends and felt terrible. Anyways, 10 years later, the band that fired me was still going strong, and they didn't like the drummer that they had very much and really missed my playing, and they ended up asking me back. And interestingly enough, most of the people that backed away from me when I turned into the Spider, they came around. So that was interesting, but it was really terrible for 10 years, and I've spent a long time, coming back since then. And then, the thing that happened with the insurance that Maureen mentioned. I finally was able to have my surgery, and all of those years in between junior high school and before I had the surgery, I was terribly depressed. And then after my first surgery, the depression lifted. And I've continued to have a whole bunch of other surgeries after I've had 9 surgeries so far. I'm about to have my 10th in a few weeks. So, and it's just so much different. So, anyways, I think that's probably a good place for me to stop and hand it over to someone else.
Can I have, oh, thank you. Our next speaker is Jake W. I'm not going to say his last name just out of protecting. So this is what Jake wrote for me to read. Jake is a female-to-male transgender teenager who grew up on Cape Cod. He's a painter, an illustrator, who, come August, will be attending Maine College of Art, Visual Arts. Visual arts have been a part of his life since childhood. As a student, he's also developed an interest in biology and natural sciences. Having started transitioning many years ago, I think since a long time, he's now vocalizing his reality as a trans person in today's political climate. Thank you, Jake.
So my name is Jake. I'm 18 years old as of March, and I have known that I was different since I was 5 or 6. Going back to childhood, I've always had clues similar to Ricky. I think when I was growing up, I was a hand-me-down kid. I grew up with all of my older siblings' stuff. And my favorite shirt was the fireman shirt that my brother had. And my favorite toy was the Darth Vader mask that my brother had. And my favorite thing to do was play wiffle ball outside. And when I was inside doing girly things, playing Barbies, I was the husband. I was never really connected to being a little girl. I was dressing up, but I was being someone else because being me at 5 years old was too much. And so I ended up going to Stony Brook Elementary School, and I had an incredible first couple of years in elementary school. I had no concept of gender, really. I was just being a little kid and trying to do whatever makes me feel happy, picking moss off of rocks and just grubbing around in dirt. And when I went to OES in Orleans, I totally shifted my world. My parents had just gotten divorced. We had just moved to one town over, but even that's crazy when you're 8 years old. And I had just found out about a TV show called I Am Jazz, which was my first real exposure for trans media. And I had, sorry, I had been watching Tu Wong Fu since I was a little kid, and seeing people dressing up in clothes that didn't really match them, and I grew up near P-Town. I mean, everything is normal. And so I started to realize that I felt differently in 3rd grade, and I used a game as an outlet. It was an online game called Movie Star Planet, which is a great tool for children today now to have so many communities available to you. And I realized that I was a little boy, and I started online calling myself Jake at 8 years old. And I didn't come out until 2 years later. I was in 5th grade, and I started to come out to my friends as a boy. And I decided to cut all of my hair off and just never wear girls' clothes again, because I had been trying for so many years to just fit in and be as comfortable as I could be. But it was killing me. And I had a lot of despair just by being alive as a very young child. And when I came out at school on a field trip, the rest of the day, no one referred to me as a girl. My friends were my biggest support group and had immediately, as children, because they just don't know any better, switched. Which that was the biggest blessing for my entire life, was that I came out so young and could craft my life from where I wanted it to be. And going into middle school, everyone was already calling me Jake. My parents were pretty accepting. My dad, not so much. We got into quite a big argument at first, but we made headway over the years. And my mom was also hesitant at first, but she just wanted me to be happy. Both of my parents, when I say they were supportive, they just wanted me to not die. And so going into middle school, in the school system, my name and my gender marker was changed at 12 years old. I haven't been a girl in the school system since I was in 6th grade, so going through the educational system now, there's really no trace that I'm trans, unless you ask my teachers. And I dealt with a lot of depression through middle school. I could have not gotten through middle school, and by 8th grade, it had gotten so bad that one of my friends had mentioned to our guidance counselor, hey, he's really struggling. And so from that point on, my parents got me a therapist, and it was Maureen. And I started to really feel more comfortable with myself and more normal with myself. If you had asked me if I was trans when I started working with Maureen, I wouldn't have told you because I was so afraid. I was still presenting myself as a little boy, already being trans, but I would not have told you. It was too frightening because it's dangerous to be alive. And I started to medically transition at 14. I started to take hormones. Once a week I inject my own stomach with hormones, which it's definitely a learning curve of injecting yourself weekly. And once I started to actually feel the change in my body and grow stubble, get a snail trail on my stomach, grow chest hair, I felt free. I felt more like a kid than I did when I was a kid. And immediately my friends noticed that I was happier. My parents noticed that I was happier. When I started taking hormones, my dad was still not totally comfortable with me transitioning. But I phrased it as, if you had said that you wanted to be a man when you were a little kid, and grandma had said, no, you have to stop your hormones just in case you want to be a woman someday, how would you feel? And my dad's response to that email was, okay, what do we have to do from here? And so I started taking hormones, and my life just turned around. And now I've gotten through all 4 years of high school because of this, and because of the medical care and the support that I've gotten. And I'm graduating, which was not a reality for me when I was 11, 12, 13, 14. It was, every year it was a gamble until I got the support that I needed. And now it's not a gamble. I'm supposed to be getting top surgery in the summer, so I'll be getting my first reconstructive surgery. And for an 18-year-old to be pumped about surgery is very strange. But I'm looking forward to be stuck in bed in recovery. And even though shaving is a hassle, it's my favorite part of every day, getting up and shaving my face, because I worked hard to shave my face. And even when I was dealing with acne a couple of years ago, as a teenager, acne is like, you know, you think about it all the time and no one else really does. But when I started hormones and I started to develop acne like a teenage boy instead of a teenage girl's acne, I was so proud. My face looked like pepperoni. It was horrible. I worked for these zits, and I couldn't be happier. I think that with all the support and along my journey now, I've made the headway that I would not have been here if I just didn't get the support that I had needed. And it's really frustrating to still have to be afraid in some sense every day, because I'm not afraid for myself and how I'm feeling every day now, but the world is a very dangerous place, and children like me should not still have to live in fear, not fear of themselves taking them out, but other people targeting us. But really, that's, I think I only filled up 10 minutes, but that's like an overview of my story.
Yeah, believe it or not, this is the third time Jake has done this for me. He's an old pro on panels. He does a wonderful job, and you know, facing a lot of pushback right now in the world, so it's a hard place to be. Our next panelist will be on my left, Mara Ray Betty. Mara very, very kindly decided to fill in at the last minute because the person we were expecting to have today, Alejandro Marcel, became very ill. So my good friend Ricky scrambled around to find someone who would be good, and Mara said yes. So I will read a little bit about I'll read a little bit of what Mara sent me, but I will let her tell you her story. Mara's 51 years old. She uses the pronouns she and her, and identifies as a trans woman. She's the parent of 2 boys. She was born and raised in Massachusetts and lives in Plymouth for the past 21 years. She owned her own architecture practice for 12 years, more than 12 years, and now works in Boston at the largest minority-owned architecture firm in the U.S., Moody Nolan, working on major projects with massive budgets and even larger civic impact. She is the project manager in their Boston studio and was recently elevated to associate status. She's the only trans employee in the company of nearly 400 colleagues. She practices architecture in Massachusetts and many southwestern and midwestern states. She serves on her company's diversity and inclusion committee. She is the Boston Studio DEI champion/liaison, which addresses issues related to diversity, equity, justice, and eliminating bias and microaggression in the workplace. Ooh, you got your work cut out for you there. She also serves on the local studio's culture committee, which works with corporate leaders on matters related to firm-wide culture. As one Moody Nolan, they have 14 locations. They work on personal growth, education, and advancement professionally and socially. Diversity by design. Most of her career, she's served on nonprofits, town boards, and committees centered on advocacy for balanced community development, affordable housing, and combating homelessness. Since her transition in 2020, she serves on the Cape and Islands Transgender Emergency Fund and the Cape and Islands Trans Day of Remembrance Committee. She recently started participating in the Cape and Islands, Taunton, and Plymouth Pride organizations and events. I'll let Mara speak for herself.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say all that, so thank you. And I do want to clarify that I do identify as trans, and if people ask for more clarification, I usually say trans woman, depending on the audience with. My story is a lot like Ricky's. I've known I was trans since 4 years old, and I have really vivid memories of experiences to prove that. I didn't always know the language, and the language changed all the time, but the feeling never changed. And the things that I can remember, I guess I'll say, experimenting with at that young age, at every opportunity that I have, always looking for the next opportunity, are really sort of pervasive in my memory, because I don't have a lot of childhood memories, but I remember every time I was dressing. And I have a lot of good memories because my family tells me all the time. But those memories kind of go to the back a little bit. I didn't really tell anybody I was trans or what was going on. I think in hindsight, and talking to my mom now, who's very supportive, I think she wonders why I didn't come forward. But back then I was really afraid. I mean, I was really afraid to tell my parents. There was language around the house. There was language around the neighborhood and the people that we associated with that just didn't give off the signal that it was okay to say what was on your mind, if it was anything to do with gender or gender dysphoria. So when I was in high school, I just started to not go on family vacations so I could stay home and present as much as I could. And I think people just thought I was an introvert. I'm not sure. I don't remember people really asking me why, but that's sort of how I went into college. I would say that from my earliest memories, I could recall praying every night to either wake up as a girl or not wake up at all, and that didn't change until I went to get help in college, which happened to be really around the first opportunity that I had to go bring this up to someone smarter than me when I wasn't in my household was literally the first day of college, and I went to the school therapist and started asking questions, and I spent a lot of time in the library researching before the internet, books, and just every free moment. And I met my wife, partner, best friend of now like 32 years on the first day of school in college, and we started dating a couple years later, and within, I would say, a couple months of dating, I knew she was going to be a big part of my life, and I told her I was trans. And she was very supportive, but I knew sometimes it was hard and sometimes it was reluctant, but you know, we were best friends and we supported each other, and the things that we did around being trans were things that helped build our relationship. And when she talks about it today, she talks about some of the things that she attributes to the reasons she fell in love with me have to do with my character and including the parts of me that are identify as trans. So it's not separable, but we basically, I actually came to this UU about 17, 20 years ago, and I started doing group therapy. I have been in all sorts of different therapy, and I think for me, I did everything I could for as long as I could to heal, to get better, to pray it away, to make it go away. It's something that I just didn't ever want to, even though I knew what was going on, I just didn't want to admit it because I knew that was going to come with a lot of pain. And, you know, I have two boys. One is graduating WPI next month, and the other is high school age. And they're supportive. And when I started to have these feelings that well, for me, going to support groups and going out, I never presented in public except for a support group, but I would dress a lot at home. You know, I'd find events to go to. And it got to the point where I wasn't hiding at home around my boys and my wife. It started to be something a little bit more androgynous after work, but it got really hard changing all the time. And I also was doing more and more research and kind of knew where I had to go, but I didn't feel like I could transition on the job at the practice that I worked at in southeastern Mass. So I left to start my own business, and but it was under the guise that I would be doing that so I could be close to home and I could take care of the boys, I could do the soccer practices and do the lunches and the breakfasts and get them off to school. But I was doing it because I wanted to present more. So, you know, I started working out of my home, and then I had a bricks and mortar space, and I would work late at night presenting, and then I would come home and change, or I'd change during the day when I was going to, you know, coach soccer or something. And it became exhausting. And every decade I said that I was going to do something towards transition, and it just got further and further away until around 45 when I said I'm going to start hormones, at least a really small dosage, to see if that's something that would help some of these feelings subside. And they say if you start taking hormones and you're not trans, you're going to run from it, but that's usually not true. Usually you want more. And that's what happened to me, but I wasn't out, and I was running my practice, and I was afraid that if I came out, I'd lose all my clients. So I was on hormones for about 5 years, and it got really tough to hide things. And I was telling more and more people. I wasn't really admitting it to myself yet, but I was getting really distracted at work, and things were getting really difficult. And I like to tell people the short story is I came out the hard way, and you know, I broke, and I ended up in the hospital, and you know, I spent probably 6 weeks well, 3 weeks inpatient and 3 weeks outpatient. And I only went to the hospital to get well, but, you know, they put Mara on my room. People called me Mara in front of my family. My therapist had put me in the hospital after an attempt on my life. And, you know, I just wanted to get well, and I didn't know what it was, but the people there kind of showed me that I was already kind of out. I was already telling people I was already transitioning. I'd already told so many people, and I'd already done the hard part, and I just hadn't really admitted to myself. And I went to an outpatient program for LGBTQ folks, and I went presenting male the first day, and there was a bunch of non-binary people in the room that, you know, just amazed me how strong they were, because they were presenting with, you know, full-on beards with glitter and makeup, or, you know, jeans and buzz-cut hair. And it just was a lot of strength and bravery. And I just looked at them and thought, well, if you can do that, I can present female. And the next day I went presenting female, and that was the last day I ever presented male again. And it got, you know, it got harder, and my wife was still supportive, but we knew that our love for each other would probably look different eventually. And basically, we decided to separate, but we still lived together for probably another year and a half. And that was back in 2020, and I moved out and slowly closed my business, because after I came out, I did lose most of my clients. Not my repeat clients, but any new clients that I had lost. And it made it really difficult to provide, and that was really hard for me. So I kind of went on a sabbatical from my business for a while, and I worked in retail for minimum wage. And but that was all during COVID, and, you know, it was something that I needed to do as part of my transition to be in women's spaces. So I worked in a women's clothing store, and it was really fantastic, but I soon found out that it wasn't my vocation, and I started to apply for job, you know, permanent employment, and basically found Moody Nolan in Boston, and that was about 7 months ago, and it's been kind of a whirlwind. And I just went there to find basically income. That's really what it was, because I applied to lots of places here in the Cape, and I thought I was going to make a quaint little life, and, you know, working in custom high-end residential architecture like I was doing, and you know, and I had it all planned out, but I didn't get hired. But this company in Boston hired me, and I was just going to work. But I found so much purpose because of their mission. It's been pretty invigorating, and it's been it's been a pretty incredible pace too. I work a lot now, which is good because I keep busy. But yeah, that's my story.
Thank you, Mara. Our next and final speaker is Reverend Bran Lennox. Reverend Bran Lennox finds limitless joy in the art of ministry. They are the minister of the UU Church in Harvard, Massachusetts, and are involved in a variety of UU organizations, including the Association of UU Music Ministries and the Queer and Trans Liberation Platform, the Uplift Collective. With a background in music and dance, they seek to approach worship and pastoral functions with soulful creativity. Reverend Bran identifies as non-binary, queer, and disabled, and considers these identities as a source of connection and compassion. When not ministering elsewhere, they live in northern Baltimore with their spouse, corgi, pet snake, and dozens of houseplants. Reverend Brand is honored to return to Brewster for this panel after serving here as lead minister last year.
Hey everyone, it's amazing to see so many familiar folks and some people I don't recognize. And I will start by saying, especially for those who are familiar, that there's no real way for me to tell this story without getting really kind of personal and talking about some things that are a little deeper, a little bit more sensitive. So you may learn some things about me that you didn't expect today. And also for those of you who, for yourself or for somebody in your family, may be a little bit sensitive to topics around things like sexual assault and suicidal ideation, please, I will not be offended if you need to step out and take space. So I'll start by talking about where I am now. I identify as several things. I'm transmasculine, so I was assigned female at birth, and I'm transitioning in a masculine direction. I am non-binary. I also identify as multigender and as genderqueer. And all of these things are parts of my identity. Excuse me. I've already preached once today. And at the moment I have been on low-dose testosterone since I was 28. And I am currently in the long, drawn-out, awful process of seeking top surgery, which is a double mastectomy. And so that's where I am now. And there are two portions of my history with gender, and one is my young life, and one is more recent years. And we'll start talking about my childhood. So as a small child, I grew up close to 5 of my cousins and a brother, all of whom were male. And I didn't really think anything about our genders. I just thought I was one of them. We played and all was well. And at school, I was sort of forced to wear dresses, which I hated. But I sort of thought of myself as a tomboy, if anything. But I do have really strong memories of pulling stunts like jumping off the top of the tall playground structures in order to prove my masculinity to the other children because I was small and I was always very feminine looking. And so kids would laugh at me if I said I was more of a boy. And so I had to prove myself. So I would do silly things like that. And then puberty came along, and it was a horror show. I felt deeply rejected during puberty by my brother and cousins, all of whom stopped wanting to play with me because they told me I was a girl at that point. Similar to some of the other folks who talked today, the changes I experienced in my body during puberty all felt really wrong for me. I really had dysphoria around my chest from a really young age. I didn't like the way that people treated me differently. And I also, I was absolutely horrified by menstruating. And I actually started starving myself, and I began to have an eating disorder from puberty age because I really did not want to menstruate. It didn't work. I still bled. It was awful. But I was also so in denial about it, in coping with the trauma of it by being in denial, that I would bleed on everything all the time because I didn't want to acknowledge that this was happening to me, which got me teased and things like that. So puberty was not a good time. And let's see where else. So fast forwarding a little bit, I would say I didn't know that transgender was a concept at all. I'd never heard anything like that. And I started to be told that I was pretty, and I started to be treated specially because I was pretty. And so I embraced my femininity as a way of trying to get some power. Because people would give me things and do things for me. if I put makeup on and if I dressed in a feminine way. And so I very much presented in a feminine way. I also became very passionate about ballet, which to me wasn't itself a feminine thing. It was the movement that I loved. But in order to succeed in ballet, which I went into professionally, I had to hyper-emphasize the feminine because ballet is such a gendered pursuit. So I really embraced the femininity, and I put it on, and I put it on intensely. And I didn't really argue with it. And I will also say that during about the ages of 5 to 22, I was repeatedly sexually abused by a number of different men. And one of the lines that you'll hear conservative reactionaries say is that being gay, being trans is a response to trauma, that it's just our way of interpreting what happened. Well, being sexually assaulted by men did not make me trans. Being sexually assaulted by men made me stay in the closet to myself because I was afraid of men. So I didn't want to believe that I could be one. And so that was how that impacted me. So I met my first trans friend when I was about 17 or 18 at a UU church that I started attending in Philadelphia. And I met him about a month before he came out as trans. And I remember the first time I met him, he was this really shy, kind of awkward person. And I asked him what his name was, and he goes, Augie. And then I asked him, what he liked to do with his time, and he was like, music. I was like, why are you not answering my questions? I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. And then a month later, we were in choir together, and he came out to the choir and said he was going to start transitioning into being a man, and it just clicked. And I realized that he was trying to be honest, but he didn't know how out he could be. And he went from being this shy, uncomfortable person to being a glowing, friendly, charismatic person pretty much overnight. As soon as he came out to us, he was just himself from that day on. And it was incredible to see sort of his journey in that process. And then I met a few other trans people over the course of the next couple of years. But this was a new idea for me. I still didn't apply it to myself. So my first marriage was also a dynamic that impressed femininity into me in a pretty serious way. And when I left my ex-husband, I took that opportunity to discover a little bit more about who I wanted to be. As I was sort of experimenting with this, I confided in an old friend, that I wanted to stop being feminine. And that I was sort of working on presenting myself in a way that felt more real to me. And my friend laughed at me, and so I ran back into the closet. That she could not believe that I was anything other than a cisgender woman. Several years went by, and I was hanging out with some friends, and I had gotten to know a lot of other non-binary people at this point. I understood gender and sort of broke the binary a lot better just socially. And I was in the car with some of my friends, and one of them accidentally referred to me as they in the car. And it hit me, and that was the first time that I just knew that that was the correct pronoun for me. Like, the moment that I heard they as a pronoun attached to me, it was like the sky opened up and started raining on me in this joyful way. And I was reeling. And I didn't say anything to anybody then, but maybe about a week later, I started asking the people closest to me if they would use that pronoun for me. And it just felt right. And it just felt so correct. I felt seen in a way that I'd never felt seen before. Because what I started to realize, I believe that gender is a spiritual construct. I don't think there's any other type of construct that really fits, and I have a whole theological proof about that we can talk about some other time. But I believe gender is a spiritual construct, and I experience my gender in a very sort of magical, spiritual way. My whole life, I have felt like I was bigger than my body, that myself was a little bit too big for the body that was built for me, and that it was burning me up to have a body that couldn't contain me. And when I started changing my body language to inhabit my masculinity, and when I started transitioning socially, and then later when I started transitioning medically, I started to fit myself. My body started to take on the shape of the self that I knew, and I stopped feeling like I was burning up. I started feeling like I could hold all of me for the first time. Going on hormones was a really weirdly easy decision. It's just something I woke up and decided to do one day. I happened to be living in California, which is an informed consent state. So I went to my doctor. I said I wanted to start testosterone, and I walked out with a prescription like the next day, which was amazing. So I started low-dose testosterone. And the first thing that changed with T is that since I was about 6, I have had passive suicidal ideation constantly. Every moment of every day, my brain suggested I die. And any inconvenience would be met with my brain suggesting that I kill myself. And I had no idea how much of my energy was going into this, and I fought it, and I've been in therapy, and I've been on medication and everything, and nothing ever disrupted this. Ever, ever, ever. And then when I started testosterone, it just went away. Like a door closing. Like I couldn't internalize my anger anymore, and I couldn't turn it in on myself, and I didn't want to die. And I don't tell that story a lot, but it's amazing how much energy you have when you're not fighting the part of your brain that doesn't want you to be alive. It shuts it down, the chatter stops, and when I know that my shot is wearing off, because I'll wake up and my brain will say, hey, do we want to die today? And I'm like, no, we want to take our shot today is what we want to do. It's absolutely incredible. I feel very, very fortunate. But this gets into one of the ways in which I really feel like trans masculine people are marginalized, is that testosterone is a scheduled substance. This means that if I have one vial of my hormones that I don't have an up-to-date prescription for, it's one milliliter of testosterone, I could be charged with a felony. So I'll just move on from that. Let's see. So I guess as far as dysphoria goes, I didn't really know I had dysphoria. I knew I hated my voice. I didn't recognize it as gender dysphoria. I also didn't recognize I thought that maybe my chest dysphoria was more like body dysmorphia around size or something like that. I didn't really have an association with that as being gender related until I started transitioning. And the experience that I have of dysphoria now is like I used to live in a tiny little box, and it was just where I'd always lived, and it was fine, and it was not a big deal because I didn't know what I was missing. And then I was offered my dream home with gardens, and with I started having the opportunity to build this residence for myself, and it was delightful. And the idea of going back to living in the closet feels like being asked to go back and live in this tiny box. And again, before, I didn't know how bad it was because it was all I'd ever known. And now the concept of letting go of this dream home and taking it apart and going back into living in this little box is terrifying to me. I couldn't handle it now that I know what else I could have. And I think that with hormones, with surgeries, a lot of the time we don't know how we're going to react until we try it. We have an idea, but we don't have a crystal ball. Less than 1% of gender-affirming surgeries have a regret attached to it from the patient, which is an absolutely astounding success rate as far as surgical regret goes. but also, even for people who do regret it, humans have the right to try stuff, right? Like, we have the right to attempt things and to make mistakes. We do it all the time. We get a haircut or a tattoo, or there are more permanent things that we do with ourselves and with our bodies. And the fact that we may be wrong isn't a reason not to. So that's sort of an argument there. At the moment, where dysphoria affects me most in terms of microaggressions is the thing that I notice most often is that when I go to a cafe and I order a coffee and they ask me for my name, I say my name is Bran. And they say, Bryn? And I say, Bran. And they say, Bren? And I say, Bran. And they say, Brianna? And I say, Bran. And it drives me up the wall. I understand it being an individual mistake that's easy to make, but the fact that it happens every time, no matter who I'm talking to, no matter where I go, makes it really painfully obvious that it is their perception of my gender that's causing them to not hear me when I tell them who I am, which makes me deeply uncomfortable. And the reason why I'm seeking top surgery now, specifically, it's always been something that's sort of been floating around in my mind, but why I want it now is that I'm at the point of like androgenizing with testosterone, where people will see me on the street or whatever, and they'll say, sir, and then they'll look down and see my chest, and then they'll say, ma'am, I mean. And it sort of breaks my heart every time that happens, because I hate that this one part of my body is key in terms of people making an assumption about me. I don't necessarily need them to think I'm a man. I just wish that they didn't care. Like, I wish that the first thing that people greeted me with wasn't an assumption about what genitals I was born with. That makes me deeply uncomfortable. So the idea of not having that experience ever again is really exciting to me. I'm also excited. I've been getting into ballet again lately because testosterone has given me back a lot of my physical capacity that I had lost through my disability, which is just amazing. But I've been getting back into ballet, and the concept of learning how to dance without my breasts is just incredibly exciting to me. How it will feel to move seems really fantastic. So that's sort of a dream I'm working towards. I'm going to wrap up here, just making sure I didn't miss anything I wanted to mention. I guess as far as the legislative efforts recently, I can't really talk about it because every time I see another news article, I sort of shut down a little bit. And I can't make good words because it hurts too much. It is too scary. I think it is true that we are facing genocide as an identity, and I'm terrified of it. And I'm leaving this story with those my trans siblings. I'm here in solidarity with you, and with my cisgender siblings here, I'm leaving you with this story in hopes that you have it in you to take on some of that work that I just don't have in my heart. And I will support you in the things that you need.
I know you said you can't find good words, but I think genocide's a pretty good word for what we're experiencing right now, and it needs to be said. And I know that Sue is going to take this moment to pass the hat. Yeah. Grab a mic, Sue. Oh, absolutely. This is a bio break, pass the hat break, stretch break.
Right.
And people are going to come up and down the aisles. If you enjoyed this and would like to hear more things like this, please contribute. Thank you. And then we will have questions and answers from our panelists.
Yes.
And our moderator.
Do you know where it is?
I will. Oh, here we have. I will. Yes, it's right here, and I'm gonna say it.
We need to get somebody to walk around. Maybe somebody on, I don't know. Hi, Abigail. There you go.
Pigs have improvement a little at least. When 23 years ago, I wrote my first column supporting gay marriage. And the Cape Cod Times got so many angry letters that they allowed 3 pastors to go after me in the Sunday paper.
Well, so yes, and I think that
Okay, let's try to get back in here so we can have a little time for questions and comments from the audience. Thank you. What an obedient crowd. Before we get started with Q&A, and Sue is going to pass a mic around if you have a comment or a question, there was one thing I wanted to say that I didn't get a chance to say before, that Joe Lima, who is the president of PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, which now has a large contingent of trans parents and grandparents attending, that he, as they have a campaign going, well, he is going to be sitting out there at a table with a lot of really helpful literature that is yours for the taking. He asked me to read something today, too, which I hope you will think about. 20 states have anti-trans sports bans, with more states trying to pile on with trans discrimination. Now it's time to act in support of trans student athletes. The Department of Education is taking comments through May 15th on its proposed rule on Title IX athletics, which prohibits categorical exclusion of trans athletes by schools and sets criteria to which they must adhere to receive federal funds. In fewer than 5 minutes, you can support trans, non-binary, and intersex student athletes by filing a federal comment with the Department of Education. Just visit the homepage of PFLAG Cape Cod's website at pflagcapecod.org, PFLAG capecod.org, for more information and a link to submit your comments in support of hard-won Title IX protections before the May 15th deadline. Say you are with PFLAG and add a personal sentence on why federal trans inclusion in sports matters to you, your family, and your neighbors. And while you're on PFLAG Cape Cod's website, you'll find links to useful facts and information, including debunked myths about trans athletes and other insights. Together, we can ensure that non-discrimination protections based on sex are fully inclusive of our transgender, non-binary, and intersex loved ones and neighbors. Thank you. Does everybody know what intersex means? Does anybody not know? Okay, I just thought I'd say that. It's a newer term. They used to use the word hermaphrodite, but it's really, okay. So it's someone who is born with both sets or ambiguous genitalia, and often included in the trans community. Okay, so as we have questions and comments, I simply want to ask everyone to direct their comments either at a panelist or at me, and to have that comment be respectful and kind, and to include in it your own, come from your own self and your own experience, not something you read somewhere, but something that you relate to personally, if you can. And Sue is going to go take the mic around.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank everyone on the panel, each and every one of you, for speaking so openly from your heart, for sharing your experiences. It's really a privilege to hear it, and I'm very grateful to be more understanding, more informed. And so my question isn't an individual question to anyone. It's just kind of a general question. There are other cultures on the planet that for thousands of years have recognized and accepted non-binary individuals in their community. And I'm wondering what any of your opinions might be about why this society in this country is so opposed to it.
Reverend Brand's going for that one.
It's about power. When we can convince people that they belong in a hierarchy of and within binaries, then we have more power over them. And our culture is a very intense power hoarding hierarchical culture. This is just one of the ways that we do that. I would say also there are some forms of the Christianity that sort of runs in the history of our country that has impressed gender norms through an interpretation of mostly the writings of the Apostle Paul. Not Jesus, Paul.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to comment on that? Or I think that pretty much says it all. And yes, you're right about there being other cultures. They tend not to be the complex culture that the Western cultures are. But there are definitely people who either identify cross-gender or non-binary in many, many cultures. Yes. Wait.
My 13-year-old has come out within the last year of trans, and she changed her name, which, you know, I will call her no problem. She's my daughter's child, and my daughter says, your grandmother will be all over taking care of, giving you information. So now, but my daughter thinks it's a phase. And she says, well, if it's a phase, we're supporting her exactly that way. And I was lucky enough to get these magazines and to give it to her. And she acted like I was, why are you doing that? And when I said I was coming here today, she was also like, okay. So that's what makes me wonder, is she really behind my granddaughter? My daughter is my daughter behind my granddaughter. And we know that my son-in-law's parents are not behind her. And even when I called somebody in this book, and they are very lucky, they live near the University of Pennsylvania, and they could go there to a clinic, which she won't go to. But they said, and I understand there was an issue in the bathrooms in a junior high. Yes, and I even said, well, is there any chance the nurse has an office or something? I understand you can be bullied. I can understand it can be horrible. These simple decisions about, and before my granddaughter came out, over the years, I would think it must be horrible to think you're in the wrong sex, to grow up saying, I'm wrong. I mean, you're wrong for a lot of normal decisions, and I have had depression, and so but you know, if you say that so much violence and depression and suicides in the trans community, what can I do to protect my grandchild?
Thank you for that comment.
Oh, go ahead, Jake.
As someone who couldn't come out to my grandmother because she passed away before I was able to, please continue to be as supportive as you are. That's really all. For your granddaughter right now, that's probably going to be the most important thing, is that grandma loves me. If you're doing really all you can with the pamphlets, the information, you're giving your daughter as many resources as you can, and she's just not listening. You can't, the way that you can't make people not transgender, you can't make people not immediately not like unaccepting of something. It's I know that you said she came out last year, right? Yeah. Yeah, it's it's hard, especially if it's been going on for a year. I mean, my dad, I came out when I was 11, I'm 18. My dad still struggles with my gender identity, and it's not even his life. It's just, she might just be the way that she is, and you will just have to keep continuing to inform your daughter and love your granddaughter. Unfortunately, I think it just might be the case.
I just want to give a quick shout out to grandparents, because over the 30 years, I find that grandparents are the best supporters of trans kids. They've seen it all and they just don't give a hoot. And they love their children. I think it's more personal for parents. It feels as if they're being a bad parent if they don't do this or they do that.
I just wanted to add that just as there's no one way to be trans, you know, I look back and I have conversations with my mom now, who's very supportive. I see my mom almost every day now because she watches my dog when I go to work. And I see my mom a lot. And you know, I mentioned earlier that I didn't feel like I could come out. In fact, I did try once when I came back from college, and she had a similar reaction. Like, she just kept going, thinking it was a phase or maybe something that would pass. I think there's no one way to parent, and I think if parents are apprehensive, I think that's okay. I think it's, you know, the most important thing to do is listen and give them, your children, space, because it may evolve. It may become something that no one's predicting, even the child. But I don't blame parents for not wanting their kids to maybe, I would say, go in either direction, because not transitioning could be extremely difficult, like we've talked about. But transitioning can be really difficult, and they probably just don't want to see their children have those challenges. So I think, you know, as long as parents are even just allowing the kids to express themselves, even if they're saying something different to people around them, I think they're trying. And that's something that took me a really, really long time to work out. And, you know, I've gone back, I've tried to figure out all the reasons why I couldn't feel free to express myself or even talk about it. But at some point, you have to kind of just move on, and my mom's accepting now, and very much part of my life, and I'm grateful for that. And I think it did take education, and she lives in a 55+ community, and she lives with a lot of people that come up from the South. And, you know, the funny thing is they have a lot of the same opinions that you hear about on TV and social media and the news coming into, say, an event that my mom's hosting. But if I'm there and they get to know me, a lot of those opinions go away. So it just takes time. So I try not to even impose my own view of people that might be conservative or Republican or something else. You know, I just try to give everyone space, and then I also just have to figure out what's right for me. So hopefully your grandchild does the same.
Oh, lots of questions, and it's 5 till 4, so if you can stay, stay. If you can't, then you can leave by those doors over there. Yes.
I do want to say that I am so humbled by how articulate each person was. Everybody's story a little different, but so powerful, and this is like an unforgettable moment, and I thank you all for your courage and integrity. And I have a question. So I'm kind of a Bran groupie, so I'm gonna put it to Bran. So can you explain to me more about how they speak, what they speaks to you, how it speaks to you in such a personal way? That's my question.
I definitely had no logic or reason attached to it when it first hit me, right? It wasn't that when somebody first called me that and it meant so much, I couldn't tell you why. It was just right. And I'm very intuitive, so that's sometimes just the way that I process. At this point, I think it's meaningful to me for 2 reasons. One is that it feels like a sign of respect when people don't make an assumption about, or don't feel like they need to address me based on a gender. That they're talking to me and not to something that they are assuming about my body. And not everybody agrees with that, but that's how I feel. The other is that when in my internal monologue, I am speaking to myself with love, I use the we pronoun. Anytime I'm saying something positive in my head, I naturally, for some reason, I say we instead of I. I tends to be more neutral, and you tends to be negative. Sure. And I think I'm a team with myself in a lot of ways. And so there is a team in here. And so they also feels poetically correct for me, just in the recognition of the multitudes that are contained. And I think I'm a team with myself in a lot of ways. And so there is a team in here. And so they also feels poetically correct for me, just in the recognition of the multitudes that are contained.
Engineers from all over the country. And, I let it happen because labels aren't that important to me until it becomes a matter of respect or disrespect, or it affects my ability to do my job. So if it continues to happen, because I'm not here to sort of change anyone's mind, I just want to be able to exist next to you. And I draw the line if they continue to call me he, and I ask that, it says right there in the little Hollywood Squares thing that it says my name, you can call me Mara, and if that's going to be a problem, we have to talk about how we move forward, but you call me by my name or proper pronouns, and that usually give people a choice if it becomes an issue. Thank you.
Yes, I know. Abigail?
My name's Abigail Gray, and I'm a transgender woman. And I've listened to the stories, and the commonality seems to be that you all realize that you're different and wanted to change at an early age. Some of us aren't so fortunate. I covered up my needs and desires with alcohol for 60-odd years. And it wasn't until I came out of detox that I found myself at a loose end and wondering who the hell I was. And this in a community where a mature transgender woman is about 30, that makes me positively antediluvian. But in my experience, I didn't have the support from, I didn't have any friends, so that didn't help very much. My ex-wife and her current boyfriend have been very supportive, although a little flabbergasted. But there don't seem to be a lot of services around for older people who are transitioning. It's been a long journey, it's been a hard journey, but a very rewarding one. And I wouldn't change it for the world. But if any of you could speak to availability of services for older people who are transitioning.
Thank you, Abigail. Is there another hand up? I can't. Sue, you can.
Be brief. I just wanted to thank all of you for wonderful presentations. I'm Rick Kuntz. I'm part of PFLAG Cape Cod, and I produce a podcast series called Profiles in LGBTQ+ Courage. Speaking of courage, Maureen was somebody I interviewed during COVID, and I'd like, if it's possible, to interview all of you for our series, and I'll coordinate through Maureen if that works for you. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you, Maureen, and all the panelists. Joe from PFLAG Cape Cod. Regarding the grandparents, they are amazing. Don't let the fact that they may be from another generation fool us into thinking that they won't be accepting and supportive. And speaking of which, we have a great booklet out there specifically called Supporting Your LGBTQ+ Grandchild. So take it for yourself or for someone whom you know that could benefit from that booklet, as well as a ton of other booklets that we have out there. So whether it's for yourself or someone you know, please check out the table in the vestibule out there and take whatever you feel is going to be helpful. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Over here.
Hi, I'm Maria, she, her. I wanted to express my gratitude and also ask a question if you feel there's time to explore it. Sometimes I get blowback from family or friends that I take Augie to so many things at his age, and I was really struck, like really moved to tears listening how many times you referenced being 4 or 5 or thereabouts and having the experiences and the feelings that you were having. Sometimes we talk about it in terms of vocation with him. What is he going to become? He's currently on MAPS. He's also been listening and responding, particularly, Brand, to your story about names was really interesting to him. I refer to him as him, but I always try to give him room to be whoever he is going to become, even when I talk to him about what kind of family he might have or spouse, and I try to leave it loose and open. I started doing that a long time ago, even with my nephew when he was a child. I would say, is there someone you like at school, as opposed to trying to assign a certain way that he should feel or experience. Just in reference to our service today, which I think a lot of you were at, and we were talking about the pain of going through change, I wanted to express my gratitude not only for the courage to share your stories today, which are painful and I imagine sometimes uncomfortable maybe to share. The biggest thing I want to guide him to is communicating, and the courage that you've shown today is such a great lesson for anybody going through any kind of change. So you're like educating us on content, but also showing such a strong example of being brave in the world. And I just wanted to thank you for becoming an experience for him at age 4 that he'll remember. And maybe that's a story he'll one day be telling on a panel. So I wanted to thank you for that. And just if there's anything anyone wants to say about something maybe you wish you could have heard at age 4, or a nice opening way that someone can speak to you, I would love to know it. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. I think you really bring up an important point about speaking up and not allowing these sort of stereotypes and customs to just wash over you. I have recently been railing against people having these gender reveal parties because it makes a lot of assumptions, and it also makes it seem that it's so important. Everybody needs to have a gender. So thank you. Someone else? Right here.
Hi, my name is Ronnie Manzone, and I'm actually intersex. When I was a little kid, my mother and father decided what I was going to be. So, for 57 years, I was led to believe I was a boy. And I did the best I could with it. But like everyone here, and we talk about 4, because I think that's as far as our mind can go back to remember things. But I always knew I was different. When we watched Walt Disney, I'd want to be singing Julie Andrews and all these things. I grew up with my sisters, not with my brothers. And when I was in school, I sat with the girls, I played with the girls. Mentally, I always knew I was a girl, but I grew up in an Italian family. My father had a business. I had 2 older brothers, and you know, being a man was going to be something that I was going to have to be. So I did the best I could with it. We was high school sweethearts. She hung around with my sister. That's how I met her. And life was interesting. But for me, I think it was instincts. I tell people, I was born with female instincts. And then what happened at 57, my spine collapsed. And L4 and 5 just grenaded. And I always had a top, which the doctors would say, well, that's gynecomastia, it happens. None of my family had a top, but I did. And needless to say, they brought me to Boston because I couldn't walk. And they realized that I had extra parts inside of me. So at 57, I found out that I was born intersex. My parents were both gone. I can remember as a child, my father would put me in a doorway and have me go up against it because my body was developing as a female. You know, and I mean, my parents, there's no doubt in my mind, they loved me and they cared about me. My mother knew I had problems. I had a lot of issues. And a lot of, like everyone was saying, you know, with the clothes, all that stuff, the dolls. My parents took my dolls away when I was 5. I tried committing suicide 3 times before I was 11. And I prayed to God every night that he would take me and have me reborn in the girl that I wanted to be. In 3rd grade, we used to have an art teacher would come into school, and she told us, today we're going to draw a picture of what you want to be. So I drew a picture of this building with a railroad track coming in, a railroad track coming out. On the railroad track, there was a little car coming in, and there was a little boy on that cart, and on the little cart on the way out was a little girl. And I put Mom at the top. I went in front of the class, and I explained to the kids that I want to go in this building and I want to come out and I want to be a woman like my mother. Because I'm like my mother. I'm not like my father. Well, needless to say, the teacher brought me to the office. The office called my mother, took me out of school. Because we didn't have the books in school then. Now that the teachers have the knowledge, that they're one of these wonderful people, and God bless you for what you've done your whole life. And there's no people to reach a person like me. Now, my parents, you know, back in those days, they were told that you don't say anything because that would be branded as a freak. And that would be the worst thing for me. So I had to find out at 57 that all these instincts that I had had were actually real. I was a girl. You know, and they shot me up with all these stuff, and they talk about these kids in sports. I mean, I didn't do anything. I was bigger than, I was larger and everything else. And so on and so forth for the medication they were giving me, because I wasn't turning into this girl that they wanted me to be. So I was stronger than all the other kids and so on and so forth. And, you know, went on and on. I could go on and on about what had happened. But the one thing I learned after all of this was that never ever second guess your instincts. Your child has instincts. Good Lord's given them instincts. Just follow the instincts. That's all I can tell you. Nature will take its course. Just be supportive. And I tell everybody, regardless if you're for or against LGBT people, just remember, in every room you go into, 1 out of 5 people are affected by it. And it's very important to understand that. And what you say to your children is critical. Because I can remember my mother and father talking about LGBT people who come from a different generation. And they were both gone, so needless to say, you know, I didn't have to confront any of this with them. And I love them to the dearest, and I love them to the bottom of my heart for the rest of my life. But the real hero here, 44 years of marriage, my wife here, has been so supportive for me. She's been my rock in everything. You know, my children, which was another thing. I had to have special shots to have kids. None of that made sense. But the whole experience, then I went to Boston Medical. God bless those people, what they do every day. And they made me, that little picture I drew in 3rd grade, that building was the Boston Medical. And they made me whole. And I promised myself the day I left there that I'd spend the rest of my life fighting for kids so they didn't have to go through the life that I had to go through. And these kids need our help more than anything right now. And that's all I can say. And
thank you so much for that. We're already running about 15 minutes over. I'm happy to be here all night, but if you'd like to end it, we can end it also. I'm happy to talk to people at any point. As everyone has seemed to be moved, you can imagine how moved that you get after 30 years of this. Thank you for coming. And don't forget to check out the PFLAG table. There's great information there. Little honorarium.
It's just excellent moderator.
Oh, thank you, Ben.
I didn't know about your education and background and career.
Oh, thank you so much.
Wonderfully done.
Oh, thank you.
So, is this live thing or is it recorded?
Yes, it'll, if you want, I'll send you the link.